The dust from the fresh grave still clung to her black dress when Quincy O'Brien first saw her, shoulders shaking with grief beside the white wooden cross in the rawhide churchyard. The late afternoon sun of June 1878 cast long shadows across the small Montana town, and he had been riding past the church on his way to the livery stable when her soft crying stopped him cold. Quincy dismounted slowly, tying his horse to the fence post. He was 26 years old, weathered from years of cattle drives and ranch work, but something about the sight of this young woman weeping alone made his chest tighten. He removed his worn hat as he approached, his boots crunching on the dry grass. She did not notice him at first. Her honey-colored hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her hands covered her face as she sobbed. The grave before her was clearly new, the earth still dark and loose. "Madam," Quincy said quietly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with delicate features that were now marred by obvious exhaustion and sorrow. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I need to be alone." Quincy stood there for a moment, uncertain. Every instinct told him to respect her wishes, but something deeper urged him to stay. He could see the fresh tears streaming down her cheeks, and without thinking, he pulled a clean handkerchief from his vest pocket. "Here," he said gently, extending it to her. She stared at the handkerchief for a long moment before taking it with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing it to her eyes. Quincy waited, his hat still in his hands. The churchyard was quiet except for the distant sounds of the town settling into evening. A dog barked somewhere and a wagon rattled past on the main street. "My brother," she finally said, gesturing to the grave. "Jacob. He was only 19. "I am sorry for your loss," Quincy said, and he meant it. He had lost people too, knew the hollow ache that came with death. "We only arrived in Rawhide 3 weeks ago," she continued, her voice thick with tears. "He wanted to start fresh, to build something here. And now he is gone and I am alone and I do not know what to do." She broke down again, her body folding in on itself as she wept. Quincy moved closer, awkwardly placing a hand on her shoulder. She did not pull away. "You are not alone," he heard himself say. "Not right now, at least." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "You do not even know me." "No," Quincy admitted. "But grief should not be carried in solitude. What is your name?" "Miriam," she said quietly. "Miriam Wells." "I am Quincy O'Brien. I work at the Double R Ranch just outside of town. I am truly sorry about your brother, Miss Wells." Miriam wiped her eyes again with his handkerchief. "He got sick so suddenly. One day he was fine, laughing and making plans for the homestead he wanted to claim. The next day he had a fever. 3 days later he was gone. The doctor said it was his lungs, an infection that spread too fast." Quincy nodded slowly. He had seen illness take people quickly before. The frontier was beautiful but unforgiving. "Do you have other family? Someone who could come help you?" "No," Miriam said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our parents died 4 years ago. It was just Jacob and me. We sold everything we had in Illinois to come west. Jacob believed we could make something of ourselves here." She laughed bitterly. "Now I have nothing. I used the last of our money to bury him properly." The weight of her words settled between them. Quincy looked at this young woman, so utterly alone and broken, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise in him. "Miss Wells, when was the last time you ate?" he asked. She blinked at him, confused by the question. "I do not know. Yesterday morning, perhaps." "Then let me buy you supper," Quincy said firmly. "You need food and you need to get away from this grave for a while. Your brother would not want you to waste away beside him." Miriam looked back at the simple cross. "I cannot just leave him." "You are not leaving him," Quincy said gently. "But you need to take care of yourself. He is at peace now. You need to think about living." Something in his words must have reached her because she slowly nodded. "All right, but I do not want charity. I will pay you back somehow." "It is not charity," Quincy said. "It is just one human being helping another. No payment needed." He offered her his arm, and after a hesitation, she took it. Her hand was small and cold against his sleeve. They walked slowly toward the town center, leaving the churchyard behind. Rawhide was not a large town, but it had the essentials. A general store, a saloon, a hotel, a blacksmith, and a small restaurant run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. Quincy led Miriam to the restaurant, holding the door open for her. Mrs. Patterson looked up from wiping down a table and smiled warmly. "Quincy O'Brien, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you in town for a couple weeks." "Been busy at the ranch," Quincy said. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Miriam Wells. She could use a good hot meal." Mrs. Patterson's smile softened when she saw Miriam's tear-stained face and black dress. "Of course, dear. Come sit down. I have beef stew fresh on the stove and biscuits just out of the oven." They sat at a corner table, and Mrs. Patterson brought them steaming bowls of stew with thick slices of bread. Miriam stared at the food as though she had forgotten what to do with it. "Please eat," Quincy urged. "You will feel better with something warm in you." Miriam picked up her spoon and took a small bite, then another. Soon she was eating steadily, and some color returned to her pale cheeks. Quincy ate his own meal, watching her carefully. "Where have you been staying?" he asked after a while. "There is a boarding house on the edge of town," Miriam said. "Mrs. Calloway runs it. I have a small room there, but I can only afford to stay another week. Jacob and I were living there while he looked for work and saved money for our homestead claim." Quincy frowned. "What will you do after the week is up?" Miriam set down her spoon, her eyes filling with tears again. "I do not know. I have tried to find work, but no one needs a seamstress or a cook right now. The saloon owner offered me a position, but—" She trailed off, her cheeks flushing. Quincy's jaw tightened. He knew what kind of work the saloon owner would have offered. "No, you will not work there." "I may not have a choice," Miriam said quietly. "I have to survive somehow." "There are always choices," Quincy said firmly. "You just need time to find them." They finished their meal in silence, and when Mrs. Patterson brought over 2 cups of coffee, Miriam looked at Quincy with something approaching hope in her eyes. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. Quincy thought about it for a moment. "My mother died when I was 16, he said slowly. "My father was already gone, killed in the war. I was alone, angry and scared. A ranch foreman named Bill Cooper took me in, gave me work, taught me everything I know about cattle and horses. He did not have to do that, but he did. He told me that kindness is what separates us from the animals and that we have an obligation to help each other through the hard times. I guess his words stuck with me." Miriam's eyes softened. "He sounds like a good man." "He was. He died 2 years ago, thrown from a horse. But I still hear his voice sometimes, telling me to do the right thing." Quincy took a sip of his coffee. "Miss Wells, I do not know exactly how to help you yet, but I promise you this. I will not let you end up in that saloon. We will figure something out." "Why would you make such a promise to a stranger?" Miriam asked, but there was no suspicion in her voice, only wonder. "Because everyone deserves hope," Quincy said simply. "And right now, you look like you need it most." Miriam's lower lip trembled and she pressed his handkerchief to her eyes again. "I do not know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," Quincy said. "But let me think on your situation. Give me a day or 2 and I will see what I can do." After they finished their coffee, Quincy walked Miriam back to the boarding house. The sun had set, and the summer evening was pleasantly cool. The boarding house was a modest 2-story structure with a wide front porch. Mrs. Calloway, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, was sitting on the porch in a rocking chair. "Miss Wells," she said, her voice sharp, "you know I do not allow gentlemen callers." "Mr. O'Brien was just seeing me home safely," Miriam said quickly. "He is leaving now." Quincy tipped his hat to Mrs. Calloway. "Evening, madam. Just wanted to make sure Miss Wells got home all right." Mrs. Calloway studied him with narrowed eyes but nodded. "Very well. Miss Wells, I will see you inside." Miriam turned to Quincy. "Thank you again, Mr. O'Brien, for everything." "Quincy," he said. "Just call me Quincy." "Then you must call me Miriam." He smiled at her, and for the first time since he had seen her in the churchyard, she smiled back. It was a small, tentative smile, but it lit up her face. "I will come by tomorrow," Quincy promised. "We will talk more then." He watched as she went inside, then mounted his horse and rode back toward the ranch. His mind was already working on the problem. Miriam needed a job, a way to support herself that would not compromise her dignity. Rawhide was not a big town, but there had to be something. The Double R Ranch was owned by Robert and Ruth Riley, a couple in their late 50s who had built their spread into one of the most successful in the territory. They employed about 15 men, including Quincy, and ran several thousand head of cattle. Quincy had been working there for 8 years, ever since Bill Cooper had hired him on. When Quincy arrived back at the ranch, most of the other hands were already asleep in the bunkhouse. He tended to his horse, brushing him down and making sure he had water and feed before heading to his own bunk. But sleep did not come easily. He kept seeing Miriam's tear-stained face, kept hearing the desperation in her voice when she spoke of her uncertain future. He had meant what he said. He would not let her fall into that kind of life. The next morning, Quincy sought out Ruth Riley. He found her in the ranch house kitchen, kneading bread dough. Ruth was a handsome woman with graying hair and kind eyes, and she had always been fair to her employees. "Mrs. Riley, could I speak with you for a moment?" Quincy asked, removing his hat as he entered. "Of course, Quincy." "What is on your mind?" Quincy explained about meeting Miriam in the churchyard, about her brother's death and her desperate circumstances. Ruth listened carefully, her hands never stopping their rhythmic kneading. "Poor girl," Ruth said when he finished. "To lose her only family and be left with nothing, that is a hard blow." "I was wondering if there might be any work for her here," Quincy said. "I know you have been talking about needing help with the house and the cooking, especially during the busy season." Ruth studied him thoughtfully. "I have been considering hiring someone," she admitted. "Sarah left last month to get married, and I have been managing on my own. But I am not as young as I used to be, and the work is hard." She paused. "You seem quite concerned about this young woman, Quincy." Quincy felt his face heat. "I just want to help her, madam. She is in a bad situation through no fault of her own." Ruth smiled knowingly. "Bring her by tomorrow morning. I will speak with her and see if we might suit each other. If she can cook and clean and does not mind hard work, I would be willing to offer her a position. She could stay in Sarah's old room above the kitchen. It is small, but it is clean and comfortable." Relief washed over Quincy. "Thank you, Mrs. Riley. I really appreciate this." "Just make sure she understands that I expect honest work," Ruth said. "I am offering her a position, not charity." "She will understand," Quincy assured her. "She has too much pride to accept charity anyway." That afternoon, Quincy rode back into town. He found Miriam sitting in the churchyard again, though she was not crying this time. She was simply sitting beside her brother's grave, her hands folded in her lap. "Miriam," he called softly as he approached. She looked up, and her face brightened slightly at the sight of him. "Quincy, I did not expect to see you so soon." "I told you I would come back," he said, sitting down on the grass beside her. "And I have news. Mrs. Riley at the Double R Ranch is looking for help with cooking and cleaning. She would like to meet you tomorrow morning. If you suit each other, she will offer you the position along with room and board." Miriam's eyes widened. Truly, she would do that. She needs the help and you need the work. It is perfect timing. Tears filled Miriam's eyes again, but these were different from the tears of grief he had seen yesterday. "I do not know what to say. This is more than I could have hoped for." "Say yes," Quincy urged. "Come to the ranch tomorrow morning. I will bring you myself." "Yes," Miriam said, nodding emphatically. "Yes, of course. Thank you, Quincy. I cannot believe you did this for me." "You deserve a chance," Quincy said. "Everyone does." They sat together for a while longer, talking quietly. Miriam told him about her life in Illinois, about her parents who had run a small dry goods store, about Jacob's dreams of owning his own land. Quincy told her about growing up in Kansas, about his time on the cattle trails, about the ranch and the work he did. As they talked, Quincy found himself increasingly drawn to her. Despite her grief, there was a strength in Miriam, a determination to survive and make something of herself. She was intelligent and articulate, with a quiet sense of humor that emerged as she grew more comfortable with him. When the sun began to set, Quincy walked her back to the boarding house again. This time, Mrs. Calloway merely nodded at them from her porch, saying nothing. "I will come for you at 7 tomorrow morning," Quincy said. "Wear something practical. Ranch work starts early." "I will be ready," Miriam promised. She hesitated for a moment, then reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for giving me hope, Quincy. I was drowning in despair yesterday, and you threw me a lifeline." The warmth of her hand in his sent a strange flutter through his chest. "Sleep well, Miriam. Tomorrow is a new beginning." That night, Quincy lay in his bunk thinking about Miriam's smile, about the way her eyes had lit up when he told her about the job. He barely knew this woman, but already she occupied his thoughts in a way no one had before. The next morning, Quincy was up before dawn. He washed carefully, shaved, and put on his cleanest shirt. Several of the other ranch hands noticed and made teasing comments, but Quincy ignored them. He rode into town as the sun was just breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Miriam was waiting on the porch of the boarding house, wearing a simple brown dress and a bonnet. She looked nervous but determined. "Good morning," she said as he dismounted. "Morning," Quincy replied. "Ready to go, as ready as I will ever be." Quincy helped her onto his horse, and she sat side saddle in front of him. He tried not to think about how close she was, about the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair. The ride to the ranch took about 30 minutes. Miriam was quiet most of the way, but Quincy could feel the tension in her body. "Mrs. Riley is kind," he said reassuringly. "Just be yourself, and you will be fine." The Double R Ranch came into view as they crested a small rise. The main house was a large, well-maintained structure with a wraparound porch. Behind it were the bunkhouse, the barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the surrounding hills, and several horses grazed in a nearby pasture. "It is beautiful," Miriam breathed. Quincy felt a surge of pride, even though the ranch was not his. "It is a good place," he said. "The Rileys are fair employers and decent people." He helped Miriam down from the horse and led her to the main house. Ruth Riley answered his knock, wiping her hands on her apron. "You must be Miriam Wells," she said warmly. "Please come in. Quincy, you can get back to your work. I will take care of Miss Wells from here." Quincy hesitated, wanting to stay, but he knew Ruth was right. This was between the two women now. He tipped his hat to them both and headed toward the barn, though he kept glancing back at the house. Inside, Ruth led Miriam through the house, showing her the kitchen, the parlor, the bedrooms upstairs. The house was well furnished but not ostentatious, with lace curtains and polished wood floors. Quincy told me about your situation, Ruth said as they sat down at the kitchen table with coffee. I am very sorry about your brother. Thank you, Miriam said quietly. I need someone who can cook 3 meals a day for my husband and me, plus the noon meal for the ranch hands. That is usually about 15 men, depending on the season. I also need help with cleaning, laundry, and general household management. It is hard work, and the hours are long. I rise at 4 in the morning to start breakfast, and I am often not done cleaning up after supper until 8 at night. Miriam nodded. I am not afraid of hard work, Mrs. Riley. I can cook and clean, and I will do whatever is needed. In exchange, I will pay you $15 a month plus room and board, Ruth continued. That may not sound like much, but you will have a roof over your head, 3 meals a day, and a safe place to live. It is more security than many women have on the frontier. It sounds wonderful, Miriam said earnestly. More than I could have hoped for. Ruth studied her for a long moment. Why did you come west, Miss Wells? My brother wanted a fresh start, Miriam said. Our parents left us a little money when they died, and Jacob convinced me that we could build a good life here. He wanted to claim a homestead to have land of his own. I wanted to support his dream. And now? Miriam's eyes filled with tears. Now I just want to survive, to find a way to keep going without him. Ruth reached across the table and patted her hand. Grief is a hard companion, but it does ease with time, and work can help. It gives you purpose and keeps your mind occupied. When would you like me to start? Miriam asked. How about today? Ruth said. Do you have belongings at the boarding house that need collecting? Not much, Miriam admitted. Just a carpet bag with a few dresses and personal items. Then Quincy can fetch them this afternoon. Let me show you to your room, and then we will start on lunch for the men. Miriam's room was small but charming, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking the ranch yard. It was far nicer than the cramped room at the boarding house. This is perfect, Miriam said, running her hand over the quilt on the bed. Thank you, Mrs. Riley. Call me Ruth, the older woman said. We are not formal around here. Now come, let me show you how I organize the kitchen. By noon, Miriam was helping Ruth prepare the meal for the ranch hands. They made beef sandwiches, potato salad, beans, and apple pie. The men ate at long tables set up outside when the weather was good, and Ruth rang a large bell to call them in. Quincy was among the first to arrive. His eyes found Miriam immediately, and he smiled when he saw her wearing an apron and carrying a tray of sandwiches. Looks like it worked out, he said as he took his seat. Thanks to you, Miriam replied softly. Over the next few weeks, Miriam settled into life at the ranch. She rose early and worked late, but the labor was satisfying in a way her grief-stricken idleness had not been. Ruth was patient and kind, teaching her the rhythms of ranch cooking and the preferences of the various hands. Quincy found excuses to be near the house more often than strictly necessary. He would offer to carry heavy pots, to chop extra firewood, to fix anything that seemed even slightly broken. The other men noticed and teased him mercilessly, but he did not care. Miriam began to heal. The deep sorrow in her eyes slowly gave way to something softer. She smiled more, laughed at the hands' jokes during meals, and even sang quietly to herself as she worked. One evening, about 3 weeks after she had arrived at the ranch, Quincy found her sitting on the porch of the main house. The sun was setting, and she was watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and purple. Mind if I join you? He asked. Please do, Miriam said, gesturing to the space beside her on the steps. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the day end. I wanted to thank you again, Miriam said eventually. I do not think I would have survived without your help. I was so lost, so afraid. You gave me hope when I had none. You would have found a way, Quincy said. You are stronger than you think." Miriam shook her head. "I do not know about that, but I know I am grateful to have met you." Quincy felt his heart beat faster. "Miriam, I have to tell you something. I have been thinking about you constantly since the day I met you. I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know you are still grieving your brother, but I cannot stop myself from caring about you." Miriam turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "Quincy, I am not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know. You have become important to me." Miriam was quiet for a long moment. "You have become important to me too," she finally said. "At first, I felt guilty about feeling anything other than grief. Jacob has only been gone a month, but then I realized that he would want me to live to be happy. He always wanted the best for me. He sounds like he was a good brother." "The best," Miriam said, her voice thick with emotion. "He protected me after our parents died. He took care of me, and now you have taken over that role in a way." "I do not want to just protect you," Quincy said softly. "I want more than that, but I know it is too soon. I can wait." Miriam reached out and took his hand. "Thank you for being patient with me. I am not ready for anything serious yet, but I would like to spend more time with you to get to know you better." "That is all I ask," Quincy said, squeezing her hand gently. Over the following weeks, Quincy and Miriam spent more and more time together. After dinner, they would walk around the ranch property, talking about everything and nothing. Quincy told her about his dreams of someday owning his own small ranch, of raising horses instead of cattle. Miriam told him about her love of reading, about how she used to help in her parents' store, about her secret ambition to someday open a dress shop. Ruth and Robert Riley watched the budding romance with quiet approval. Ruth, in particular, seemed pleased that Miriam was finding happiness again. "That Quincy is a good man," Ruth said to Miriam one morning as they were kneading bread together. "He has been with us for 8 years and he has never given us a moment of trouble. He is honest, hard-working, and kind. Those are rare qualities." Miriam felt her cheeks flush. "He is special," she admitted. "Does he know how you feel?" "I think so, but I am taking things slowly. It has only been 2 months since Jacob died. I do not want to rush into anything." Ruth nodded approvingly. "That is wise. Grief needs time, but do not let fear keep you from happiness either. Life is short, especially out here. When you find something good, you should hold on to it." As summer turned to autumn, Miriam found herself falling deeper in love with Quincy. It was different from the girlish infatuations she had experienced in Illinois. This was a mature, steady feeling, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Quincy courted her properly, with Ruth and Robert's permission. He brought her wildflowers from the fields, carved her a small wooden box for her keepsakes, and taught her to ride a horse. That last activity resulted in much laughter, as Miriam was initially terrified of the large animals. "I promise she will not hurt you," Quincy said, holding the reins of a gentle mare named Daisy. "Just put your foot in the stirrup and swing your other leg over." "What if I fall?" Miriam asked nervously. "Then I will catch you," Quincy said with a grin. With his help and encouragement, Miriam eventually learned to ride. The first time she successfully trotted around the corral on her own, she let out a whoop of triumph that made all the ranch hands stop and applaud. In October, the first snow of the season fell. Miriam woke one morning to find the world blanketed in white, and she stood at her window in wonder. Snow in Illinois had been commonplace, but somehow it looked different here, cleaner and more magical. That evening, Quincy asked her to take a walk with him despite the cold. They bundled up in coats and scarves, and he led her away from the ranch buildings to a small rise that overlooked the valley. "I wanted to show you this," he said, gesturing to the view. The snow-covered landscape stretched out before them, pristine and beautiful in the moonlight. "It is breathtaking," Miriam said. Quincy turned to face her. "Miriam, I know we have been taking things slowly and I respect that. But I need to tell you something. I love you. I think I have loved you since the day I saw you crying in the churchyard. You have brought light and joy into my life in a way I never expected. I do not want to rush you, but I need you to know how I feel." Miriam felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, Quincy. I tried not to at first. It felt wrong to be happy when Jacob was gone. But I cannot help it. You make me feel alive again. You make me want to look forward to tomorrow instead of dwelling on yesterday." Quincy pulled her into his arms and they stood there in the snow, holding each other close. After a moment, he tilted her chin up and kissed her gently. It was a sweet, tender kiss that promised more than words ever could. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "Will you marry me, Miriam?" Quincy asked. "I know I do not have much to offer right now, just my wages and my prospects, but I promise I will work hard to give you a good life. I will love you and protect you and do everything in my power to make you happy." Miriam's heart swelled with emotion. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally walked back to the ranch house, they were holding hands and grinning like fools. Ruth and Robert were delighted when they heard the news. Ruth immediately began planning the wedding, insisting that it be held at the ranch with all the hands in attendance. "We will have it in the barn," Ruth declared. "It is big enough for everyone and we can decorate it beautifully. Oh, this is so exciting." The wedding was planned for December, giving them 2 months to prepare. Miriam sewed herself a dress from fabric that Quincy bought for her at the general store. It was a simple design in cream-colored cotton with lace trim, but she put her heart into every stitch. Quincy saved every penny of his wages to buy them a wagon and supplies. His plan was to continue working at the Double R for now, but he wanted to start building a future for them. Robert Riley, recognizing Quincy's value and his new responsibilities, raised his wages and promised to help him find land when the time came. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy but happy. The ranch hands pitched in to help prepare, decorating the barn with evergreen boughs and wildflowers preserved from the summer. Mrs. Patterson from the restaurant in town agreed to make the wedding cake, and Ruth prepared a feast for the reception. The night before the wedding, Miriam visited Jacob's grave one last time. She brought a bouquet of dried flowers and knelt beside the simple cross. "I am getting married tomorrow, Jacob," she said softly. "His name is Quincy O'Brien, and he is everything I could have hoped for. He is kind and strong and gentle, and he loves me deeply. I know you would approve of him." She paused, tears running down her cheeks. "I miss you so much. Every day I wish you were here to see this, to meet him, to walk me down the aisle. But I know you are watching over me, and I know you would want me to be happy. So I am going to marry him, and I am going to build a good life here. I am going to honor your memory by living fully, by not letting fear or grief hold me back." She placed the flowers on the grave and stood up. "I love you, Jacob. I will never forget you." As she walked back toward town, where she was spending her last night in the boarding house as a single woman, Miriam felt a sense of peace. She would always carry grief for her brother, but it no longer consumed her. She had found love again, found hope again, and that was a precious gift. The wedding day dawned clear and cold. Miriam woke early, her stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. Mrs. Calloway, who had softened considerably toward Miriam over the months, helped her dress and fixed her hair. "You look beautiful, dear," the older woman said, pinning a small spray of dried flowers into Miriam's hair. "That young man of yours is very lucky." At noon, Quincy's friend Thomas, one of the other ranch hands, arrived with a wagon to take Miriam to the ranch. When they arrived, the barn had been transformed. Candles flickered on every surface, the evergreen boughs filled the air with a fresh scent, and 2 rows of chairs had been set up facing a simple altar. The ranch hands were all dressed in their Sunday best, their hair slicked back and their faces scrubbed clean. Ruth was wearing a beautiful dark blue dress, and Robert had donned a suit that looked slightly too tight around the middle, but Miriam only had eyes for Quincy. He stood at the altar in a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him. When their eyes met, his face broke into a radiant smile. The ceremony was performed by the circuit preacher who came through Rawhide once a month. It was simple but heartfelt, with traditional vows and readings from the Bible. When Quincy slipped a simple gold band onto Miriam's finger, she felt her heart overflow with joy. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said. "You may kiss your bride." Quincy did, to the cheers and whistles of the assembled guests. When they turned to face everyone as husband and wife, Miriam felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. The reception was a joyful affair. Ruth's feast was delicious, with roasted beef, potatoes, vegetables from the root cellar, fresh bread, and Mrs. Patterson's magnificent wedding cake. There was music and dancing, with one of the hands playing a fiddle while others called out instructions for square dances. Quincy danced with Miriam until they were both dizzy and laughing. At one point, he spun her so fast that she stumbled, and he caught her easily, pulling her close. "I love you, Mrs. O'Brien," he whispered in her ear. "I love you too, Mr. O'Brien," she replied, marveling at how natural her new name sounded. As the evening wore on, the guests gradually departed. Ruth and Robert had given Quincy and Miriam the use of a small cabin on the edge of the ranch property for their honeymoon week. It was rustic but cozy, with a stone fireplace and a large bed covered in quilts. Quincy carried Miriam over the threshold, making her laugh. He had already brought their belongings to the cabin earlier in the day, and a fire was crackling merrily in the fireplace. "Are you happy?" Quincy asked, setting her down gently. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Miriam said. "When you found me in that churchyard 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I had no hope, no future. And now look at me. I am married to the man I love, with a home and a family and everything I could want." "You gave me hope too," Quincy said. "I did not realize how lonely I was until I met you. I had work and friends, but something was missing. You filled that emptiness." They spent their honeymoon week in blissful isolation, learning each other in new and intimate ways. They talked for hours, made love by firelight, and planned their future together. Quincy told her about the piece of land he had been eyeing, a beautiful valley with a stream running through it, perfect for raising horses. Miriam told him about her dream of not just a dress shop, but maybe a small school someday, teaching children to read and write. "We will do it all," Quincy promised. "We will build everything we dream of together." When they returned to the main ranch, they moved into a small bunkhouse cabin that Robert had offered them. It was bigger than Miriam's room above the kitchen, with space for a bed, a table and chairs, a stove and storage. It was not much, but it was theirs, and Miriam set about making it a home. She continued to help Ruth with cooking and cleaning, but now as a married woman with her own household to manage as well. The rhythm of ranch life suited her. She loved watching the seasons change, loved the sense of community among the ranch families, loved the satisfaction of a hard day's work. Winter passed into spring, and spring into summer. Miriam discovered she was pregnant in June, almost exactly a year after Quincy had first found her in the churchyard. The news filled them both with joy and a little nervousness. "A father," Quincy said wonderingly, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. I am going to be a father. And I am going to be a mother, Miriam said. I hope I will be a good one. You will be wonderful, Quincy assured her. Look at how you take care of everyone here. You have so much love to give. As Miriam's belly grew, Quincy became increasingly protective. He worried about her working too hard, about her lifting heavy things, about everything. Ruth finally had to sit him down and explain that pregnancy was natural, not an illness, and that Miriam needed to keep active for her own health. In February of 1880, during a fierce winter storm, Miriam went into labor. Ruth acted as midwife, with Quincy pacing frantically outside the cabin. The labor was long and difficult, and more than once Quincy considered breaking down the door to be with his wife. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, he heard the thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby. Ruth opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "And Miriam is tired but well. Come meet your boy." Quincy entered the cabin with trembling legs. Miriam was propped up in bed, pale and exhausted but radiantly happy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. Quincy approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. "Meet your son," Miriam said softly, pulling back the blanket to reveal a tiny red face with a shock of dark hair. Quincy felt his eyes fill with tears as he looked at his child. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Jacob after Miriam's brother. It felt right to honor the man whose death had, in a roundabout way, brought them together. Young Jacob was a healthy, hungry baby who rarely cried unless he was wet or needed feeding. Quincy was besotted with his son from the first moment, and the ranch hands loved teasing him about how he had gone soft. Life fell into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. Miriam reduced her hours helping Ruth, focusing instead on caring for Jacob. Quincy worked harder than ever, determined to save enough money to start their own place. When Jacob was 6 months old, Robert Riley made Quincy an offer. There was a quarter section of land adjacent to the ranch that Robert owned but was not using. He offered to sell it to Quincy for a fair price, with payments spread out over 10 years. "You have been loyal to this ranch for a decade," Robert said. "And you are family now. Ruth and I would like to see you get started on your own place, but we do not want to lose you as a neighbor." Quincy could hardly believe his good fortune. The land was exactly what he had been hoping for, with good grazing, a stream, and a sheltered valley perfect for building a home. He shook Robert's hand enthusiastically. "I will not let you down," he promised. "I will make every payment on time, and I will build something good here." Over the next 2 years, Quincy worked tirelessly. He continued his regular duties at the Double R while spending every spare moment working on his own land. With help from the other ranch hands, he built a small but sturdy house with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a parlor. He constructed a barn and corrals and began acquiring horses to train and sell. Miriam was pregnant again by the time they moved into their new house in the spring of 1882. She was thrilled to have her own home, modest as it was. She made curtains for the windows, planted a vegetable garden, and set up a small chicken coop. Ruth gave her a cow as a housewarming gift, ensuring they would have milk and butter. Their second child, a daughter, was born in September. They named her Ruth, after the woman who had given Miriam her first chance. Little Ruth had her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's steady blue eyes. As the years passed, the O'Brien family thrived. Quincy's horse breeding operation grew successful, with buyers coming from as far as Helena and Butte to purchase his well-trained animals. Miriam did indeed open a small school, teaching not just her own children but several of the ranch children as well. It was held in their parlor during the winter months, and she loved it. They had 2 more children, another son named William, and a daughter named Sarah. Their house was always full of noise and laughter, a far cry from the desperate loneliness Miriam had felt in the churchyard all those years ago. Quincy proved to be an excellent father, patient and loving with all his children. He taught them to ride, to care for animals, to work hard and be honest. Miriam taught them to read and write, to be kind and thoughtful, to value education and family. They visited Jacob's grave regularly, bringing the children so they would know about the uncle they had never met. Miriam would tell them stories about Jacob's dreams and his courage in coming west. "He would be so proud of what we have built," she told Quincy one day as they stood at the grave with their children playing nearby. "He would love seeing his nieces and nephews." "I wish I could have met him," Quincy said, putting his arm around her, to thank him for having such an amazing sister. As their children grew older, Miriam and Quincy remained deeply in love. They had their disagreements, as all couples do, but they always worked through them. The foundation of respect and affection they had built during their courtship proved unshakable. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quincy surprised Miriam with a trip to Helena. It was the first time she had left Rawhide since arriving there all those years ago. They stayed in a hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked around the territorial capital like newlyweds. "You ever regret it?" Quincy asked as they sat in a park overlooking the city. "Coming west, everything that happened," Miriam thought about it carefully. "I regret losing Jacob," she said. "I will always regret that. But I do not regret coming here because it brought me to you, and I would not trade our life together for anything in the world." "Neither would I," Quincy said, kissing her softly. "You are still the best thing that ever happened to me." By the time they reached their 30th anniversary in 1908, Quincy and Miriam were grandparents several times over. Jacob, their eldest, had married and taken over much of the horse breeding operation. Ruth had married a lawyer in Helena and had 3 children. William was working as a foreman on the Double R, which was now run by the Riley's son after Robert's passing. Sarah, their youngest, was teaching school in Rawhide, continuing her mother's legacy. Miriam was 53 now, her honey-colored hair liberally streaked with silver. Quincy was 57, still strong but moving a bit slower than he used to. They spent their days in comfortable companionship, working together in the garden, playing with their grandchildren, and enjoying the life they had built. One summer evening, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the valley. The same valley where Quincy had proposed all those years ago. "You remember the first time I saw you?" Quincy asked. "In the churchyard," Miriam said, smiling at the memory. "I was such a mess, crying my heart out." "You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," Quincy said. "Even with tears streaming down your face, I knew right then that you were going to be important to me." "You saved me that day," Miriam said softly. "You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me that life could be good again, that I could be happy again. You changed everything." "We saved each other," Quincy corrected. "I was just going through the motions before I met you. You gave my life meaning and purpose. You gave me love and family and joy. Everything good in my life started the day I dried your tears in that churchyard." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Their grandchildren's laughter drifted from inside the house where they were playing. The horses nickered softly in the barn. A cool breeze rustled through the cottonwood trees Miriam had planted when they first moved here. "I love you, Miriam Wells O'Brien," Quincy said, taking her hand. "I love you too, Quincy O'Brien," she replied, squeezing his fingers. "Today, tomorrow, and always." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Miriam thought back to that terrible day in the churchyard when she had lost all hope. She had been certain her life was over, that she would never be happy again. But then a cowboy with kind eyes had stopped to help a crying stranger, and everything had changed. She had found not just survival, but a beautiful life full of love and family and purpose. She had found a partner who cherished her, children who made her proud, and a home that filled her heart. What had begun in grief and despair had blossomed into decades of joy. The frontier had been hard, as Miriam had learned. It had taken her brother and tested her in countless ways, but it had also given her everything she held dear. It had given her Quincy, and that alone made every hardship worthwhile. As the years continued to pass, Quincy and Miriam remained active in their community. They were respected elders in Rawhide, known for their kindness and generosity. They helped new families get established, just as they had been helped. They never forgot what it was like to be alone and afraid, and they made sure no one in their community had to face such circumstances without support. When Miriam turned 60, the town threw a celebration in her honor. The little school she had started had grown into a proper schoolhouse, and many of the adults in town had been her students at one point or another. They gave speeches about how she had taught them not just reading and arithmetic, but also compassion and perseverance. Quincy sat in the front row, beaming with pride as speaker after speaker praised his wife. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up and faced the crowd. "Many of you know how Miriam and I met," he said. "But for those who do not, I will tell you. 31 years ago, I saw a young woman crying in the churchyard. She had just lost her brother, and she was alone in the world with no money and no prospects. I could have ridden past. I almost did. But something made me stop." He paused, looking at Miriam with eyes full of love. "That was the best decision I ever made. Miriam has spent the past 3 decades making this community better. She has taught your children, helped your families, and shown all of us what it means to turn pain into purpose. She took her grief and transformed it into something beautiful. I am honored to be her husband, and I thank God every day that I stopped at that churchyard." There was not a dry eye in the room as Quincy sat down. Miriam stood up and hugged him tightly, whispering in his ear, "Thank you for stopping. Thank you for everything." As they moved into their 70s, Quincy and Miriam slowed down considerably. Their children took care of them now, just as they had once cared for their children. They spent their days sitting together, writing, reminiscing, and enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. Quincy's health began to fail in 1915. He had always been so strong, but age and a lifetime of hard work had taken their toll. Miriam nursed him devotedly, never leaving his side for long. "I am not afraid," Quincy told her one night as they lay in bed together. "I have had a good life, a full life. I have been loved by an extraordinary woman and have raised wonderful children. If it is my time, I am ready." "Do not talk like that," Miriam said, her voice breaking. "I need you here with me, and I will stay as long as I can," Quincy promised. "But whenever it happens, whether tomorrow or 10 years from now, I want you to know something. Meeting you was the greatest blessing of my life. Loving you was the greatest privilege. You made me happier than I ever deserved to be." Miriam cried then, pressing her face into his shoulder. "You made me whole again when I was broken. You gave me a reason to live when I wanted to give up. I do not know who I would have been without you." "You would have been amazing," Quincy said, stroking her silver hair. "You are the strongest person I know. But I am glad I got to be beside you for the journey." Quincy rallied after that, much to everyone's relief. He lived to see his 80th birthday in 1919, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was held at the ranch, and people came from all over the county to celebrate. "You are a legend, old man," one of his grandsons joked. "The cowboy who rescued a crying girl and lived happily ever after." "That is exactly what happened," Quincy said with a smile. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Miriam lived to be 76. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1923, surrounded by family. Quincy, who had defied expectations and was still alive at 84, held her hand as she slipped away. "I will see you soon, my love," he whispered. "Wait for me." He followed her 4 months later. His last words were her name. They were buried together in the rawhide churchyard not far from Jacob's grave. Their shared headstone read, "Quincy and Miriam O'Brien, he gave her hope. She gave him love. Together they built a legacy." Their children and grandchildren continued the horse breeding operation, and the little school Miriam had started remained a cornerstone of the community for generations. Stories of their love story were passed down through the family, an inspiration to anyone who heard it. The tale of the cowboy who stopped to help a crying woman in a churchyard became part of local legend. People would visit their graves and leave wildflowers, touched by the romance of it all. Young couples would stand at the spot where Quincy had proposed, hoping some of that enduring love would bless their own relationships. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived in Montana, proud of their heritage and the love story that had started it all. At family gatherings, the eldest would always tell the story of Quincy and Miriam, ensuring that their memory lived on. It was a story of hope found in the darkest moment, of kindness given freely without expectation of reward, of love that grew from compassion into something beautiful and lasting. It was a story that proved that one moment of choice could change everything, that stopping to help a stranger could lead to a lifetime of happiness. And it all began with a cowboy who saw a woman crying in a churchyard, who dried her tears and gave her hope, and who discovered that in saving her, he had saved himself as well.